Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me on our True Crime Wine Wednesday. I love ya and I missed ya. Okay, so for today's story, this is gonna be my first two-parter because there's so much to go through that when I was putting all of my notes together and going back and forth with all of my thoughts on the whole thing, I was like, there is just way too much to pack into one video. You guys will probably be all over the place like I am. It's part of the reason why I didn't film last week. It's just way too much to go through and I've wavered on my opinion so much. So I want to put that all out for you too so that you guys can decide. But there's no way we can do this all in one video. So today I'm going to give you a rundown on the case and kind of how it's presented at like a face value version. I don't know why that took me so long to figure out the word I wanted to say. So I just wanted to thank Renee for giving me this suggestion. When I started looking into it, I was like, oh, I think I've seen this documentary completely randomly on Netflix quite a few years ago. And when I watched the documentary, when it ended, I was just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm just going to accept the documentary for what it is and just take this as it is. But then I started realizing that there's like a whole other world out there with this story. There are a lot of people involved who are on different sides. So there are people who have one belief of this story, and then there's the other side who do believe that there's nothing more to look into. There's no conspiracy here. So I want to lay this all out for you, and I want to know what you guys think. So for today, I'm just going to start from the beginning and kind of give you the story as it's told. All right, so today we're talking about the Crowley family, and on January 17th, 2015, David, his wife Kamel, and their 5-year-old daughter Rania were found deceased in their home. I'm going to try to catch my wording and phrasing here because I keep getting demonetized. And you know what? As much as I love to make these videos and I love you guys so much, your girl's got to make some AdSense here. There has to be a little bit of a payoff. And 90% of them are kiboshed. So I'm working on my phrasing and we'll see if that helps. So to investigators who found the family, they just thought it was pretty cut and dry. They thought that David had taken his life and the life of his wife and daughter, and that he was suffering from a mental breakdown. But then, like I said, there's this whole other version of the story, if you will, where people believe that there's so much more to this than just a simple the husband snapped theory. And that's because David had been working for a few years on a movie that he wanted to get produced in Hollywood. And basically it was about this new world order that was going to take over, and that the government was going to take over, and civilians were going to lose their rights, their guns. And they feel like there's evidence that backs up these theories that somebody else was involved with this. Now, I've read theories of government involvement right down to the family being involved. So I'm very curious to see what you guys think about this at the end of the series. It's not going to be like a long series, it's just going to be a two-parter. Look at me just thinking I'm running my own like Netflix special. But yeah, I really am curious to see what you guys think at part 2 because there's a lot through. So let's start at the beginning, and we'll start with David. David was born on July 7th, 1985. His parents are Dan Sr. and Kate Crowley, and David has an older brother and a younger sister. They grew up in Minnesota, and his dad was an engineer, so they definitely didn't struggle by any means. They had a typical childhood upbringing. And in junior high, David kind of got bit by like the acting bug. And then he started to incorporate that passion into his curiosity for like the military and the army. And him and a really good friend growing up, they would make these little like army skits and they'd film it on his dad's camcorder. So by the end of doing this as just a hobby, him and his good friend had decided when high school was over, they were going to join the army. So in June 2004, he starts training. And at first he was sent to Germany. And then by 2006, he was sent to Iraq. So while he was in Iraq, like so many soldiers we hear about, he saw horrible things. I don't know if this is why specifically, but at one point he was relocated headed back to Germany. And then when he came back home, he really expressed his discontent for the United States military. He felt like he had seen so much in Iraq that didn't align with his morals. He felt like some of the stuff that was going on there just wasn't right. And he explained that he felt like there was like a narrative being fed to the world and Americans specifically and the soldiers that he wasn't aligning with and he didn't agree with and he wasn't seeing. So when he got home, he had decided he didn't really want to be involved anymore. So in 2007, he's transferred to Texas, and about a year into his stay there, he meets his future wife Kamel at a bar. It's safe to say that the sparks and that like love at first sight was pretty obvious there. I think it was like the next day he started referring to her as his girlfriend, and the feelings seemed mutual on Kamel's part too. Kamel was from Pakistan, and her family had moved to America 3 years before she had met David. And she came to the United States with her mom, dad, and younger sister. And the life that she had in Pakistan seemed to be quite sophisticated, more luxury than it was in the United States. When they were in Pakistan, they each had their own driver. They had somebody to take care of the house for them. So when they came to America, I didn't hear that they complained or anything like that, but they were just kind of thrust into a different world because now all of that was their responsibility. So within weeks of David and Kamel meeting, and they're in this puppy love phase, David finds out that he is being stop lost and he's got to go back to war, which essentially means that he has no choice. The military is forcing him to go back and fight, and he's livid because he's already expressed so strongly that he didn't agree with what was going on. So now he's met, this love of his life. He's ready to get on with his life and let that old chapter go, and he's essentially being told, you don't have a choice. Whether you like it or not, you have to go to war. And to make matters worse, he's being sent to Afghanistan. So immediately he asks Kamel to marry him. I don't think that was a hard decision for her. Like I said, it was very much this like juvenile love. I kind of thought while I was reading about it, kind of like, like your junior high or high school relationship. You never really experienced a breakup. So you just think like, okay, this is it for the rest of my life. Like we are perfectly suited together. And that's how their relationship was. I don't think it was always like really like positive, excited. I read that Kamel was very strong and able to carry herself and have her own opinions, but that David was more of the leader of that relationship. So with Kamel being Muslim and David being Christian, she ended up converting to Christianity for them to get married. And I think part of that decision wasn't necessarily that David might have not been up for it at one point in his life, but after serving in Iraq, he didn't necessarily agree with the teachings. He did love the people so much, but when he came back, he did say that he didn't always agree with the way that they followed their religion. So while David was home on leave in 2008, Kamel ends up getting pregnant, and their daughter Rania was born in August of 2009. A month after Rania was born, they decide to move to Minnesota, and I guess for Kamel, it was pretty hard because she didn't know anybody, and her personality was more extroverted. She thrived on that human interaction and building really good relationships, whereas David was okay with the move. He was much more introverted and not as trusting as people as Kamel. He didn't really want her to have people over and build strong relationships. He wasn't interested in, having like a bunch of couple friends to do things with. So it sounds like during the first few months of the being there, Kamel really struggled. And I mean, I'm sure the fact that he had just come home from doing something that he was forced against his will to do, he didn't trust anybody. He wasn't interested in opening any more doors and becoming more vulnerable, didn't help either. So he decides to switch gears from the military, and he goes back and he focuses on the other love that he was really pursuing when he was growing up, and that was acting and directing and making movies. So he enrolls in a digital video and media program. For Kamel, she ends up taking a assistant position at the University of Minnesota, and then on the side Is it just me, or when you say like Minnesota, do you want to say like Minnesota? I think it's because I watched way too much Drop Dead Gorgeous growing up, like one of the best movies ever. Minnesota. Soda. Anyway, so while she was working there, she's also studying for her master's to get a degree in nutrition. And eventually her and a friend of hers, they open up a side business where they want to create like a nutrition guide to healing your body. I read that the relationship between Kamel and her business partner was very good, but it got to a point where her partner did notice that distrust and difference between Kamel and David. When it was just her and Kamel, it was great, but then there would be times that she felt like David was kind of inserting himself to make sure they didn't get too close, and he was kind of almost putting a distrust in Kamel towards her partner. He would suggest to her that she would record their conversations so that in the future, if there was ever a disagreement, Kamel could go back and, you know, pull out her phone and show that she had this recording of what was exactly said on what date. So it seems like this is obviously rooted from his own distrust and things that had happened to him, but it was kind of trickling into and affecting Kamel's life too. And for David, what happens is he takes this anger and this resentment that he experienced and he pours into this project that he wants to create. And in 2010, he starts a project and starts writing a film called Gray State. The synopsis is pretty much a totalitarian foreign regime, and it takes over the US government, and this group of civilians bands together to resist. But the way it's explained by David when he's talking about it with peers and friends and family is it's not so much of a fiction movie, but more of what he feels like is going to be a documentary as to where the world is headed in its current state. So he just goes guns a-blazing and he pours like everything he's got into this. So from 2010 to 2012, he starts making a concept trailer for it. So instead of filming a movie or just, writing a script and sending it over and hoping somebody would pick it up, he wanted to send this trailer for it and really get somebody's attention and show the direction that he wanted to go with it. And he controlled every aspect of this thing, from directing to writing to hiring the actors to costumes. He was the one who found the locations and called the city and pulled the permits. If there were several cameras being manned at one time, he was working all of them. He was doing the music. He was doing everything. Even his house had just kind of turned into like this hub for the movie. There's photos that you see of him with this big wall. I think it's like their living room. It's completely taken over by the concept of this movie from one end to the other. And it's a storyboard of how it's all going to play out that reads in different directions. It's very intricate. There's no doubt about it. He was very intelligent, very, very thorough, and he had plans to get this thing going. I think he ended up spending $6,000 on it, which honestly, when you see the thing and you hear about all the work, I was like, that's pretty decent. Like, this looks like a Hollywood movie. So to drum up excitement and stuff for this film, he's using social media to his advantage, primarily Facebook, and he's attracting quite a decent following, specifically people who also believe that we're headed to this new world order. I guess some would call them conspiracy theorists as well, like that vibe. So the trailer launches on YouTube in 2012 and it blows up. I think right now it's been seen almost 3.5 million times. Their Facebook still runs today. It's got over 55,000 followers. This wasn't just like a little, I'm going to film this thing in my garage and no one's going to see it type thing. It got attention. So to drum up the excitement, he did a lot of tours. He spoke very openly about his thoughts of where things were going on social media. He went to conventions, spoke on the news, did radio shows, the whole thing. His main message while he's talking and promoting is that this is not far from our future. Yes, the film is being advertised as fiction. This isn't real footage of something that's going to happen, but he's kind of warning people and saying, if you don't wake up, if we don't make a change, this is not going to be fiction. This is going to be a reality TV show. Around this time, Kamel's feeling like she's kind of holding the weight while he's off promoting everything. She was very supportive of the project, but it had taken quite a few years, and she was the one that was working. David was staying home with their daughter in between working on the project, so everything was falling on her shoulders. And there was a point where she had reached out to her father and she said, I'm really unhappy. I think I'm just gonna leave him. And her father asked, well, is he abusive to you? Is he hurting you or Rania? And she says he's not, she's just unhappy. Her dad pretty much says, I think, you guys just have to work it out, and that's maybe not enough, just being unhappy. Have a conversation, see what you guys can figure out together. If he's not beating or hurting you, you should really stick it out for your family. From what I could read, it sounds like things did get a little bit better at that point, but I feel just kind of where it all leads back to is the fact that I think Kamel was just really craving more interaction with friends and building more relationships, and it just was almost impossible living with David. So in 2014, it seems like it might almost be worth it for her. It seems like he's kind of getting closer to his dreams. He gets some interest in Hollywood for his film, and it's from these two producers called the Mikes. That's what David referred them to because they were both called Mike. And the Mikes were very interested in it. They did feel like he needed to go back home and do a few rewrites though. There were things that they wanted to adjust and just, I think, kind of tone down a little bit. But for the most part, they thought that David and the whole project in general was really promising, which should be such an exciting time for David. He's worked so hard for this, but friends and the people that worked really closely with him on the project, they noticed that around this time, he starts to isolate even further than he already had. I mean, when I say isolate, he was just more of I'm gonna chill at home with my family type, but it wasn't like he wouldn't work with anybody or try to act in all the different roles so he couldn't see other individuals. He knew how to interact with people and had relationships to an extent, but even those were starting to get strained. So he eventually pulls himself out of it and comes around, and a friend calls him out on it. He's like, you were taking days and days to reply to texts and phone calls. We were really worried about you. And David looks at him and he says, if you ever see that happen to me again, can you please just be honest with me and say, hey man, we're noticing that you're retreating. Is everything okay? And he said, because I didn't really notice until now, but I was in a really dark place. So I don't know if that's why, but around April of that year, he starts keeping a journal and he logs lots of his life, but how he's feeling too and kind of what's going on within. Lots of his entries were about Grey State because it was his life, kind of how he was nervous about what would become of it. Was it going to get picked up after all these years? What would he do if it didn't? He spoke a lot about how much he loved Kamel and Rania. He put down his goals that specifically by 2016, he wanted it to be picked up for a screenplay, and then his hopes were by 2017, he would be a millionaire. Great goals to have. I mean, rule 101 of making things happen for you, write that down. Unfortunately, in this case, though, the entries took a shift. It wasn't so much focused on where they were headed and the positivity. It was becoming a little bit darker. He writes that he's experiencing personality the Minnesota accent is here to say personality changes. He says that are happening so rapidly that he almost can't keep up. And at the end of July of that year, he appears to be at the peak of a psychotic breakdown. He says there's this deep understanding that's stretching his mind past what his body can tolerate anymore. And he's writing that he's experiencing these visions of just pure horror for sometimes up to 20 minutes. It does seem not long after he was writing that the visions had subsided and things started to appear like they were going back to normal. But then friends and coworkers started to see a shift in Kamel around this time. She goes to her business partner and she tells her she wants to withdraw from the business and go on her own separate way. Her partner said that usually she would express these feelings of wanting to not be in this partnership through email, and they would be really long-winded, and she got the impression that David was helping her write it. And so she was taken aback because she knew Kamel to what she thought was a good extent. They had a great relationship, so it wasn't something that she was expecting from her. And then Kamel gets news from back home that her mother's father's been diagnosed with cervical cancer. And my understanding is that Kamel and her father didn't see eye to eye on the direction that the treatments were going. I don't know who felt what way or why, but whatever it was, they weren't agreeing on it. And David would overhear them argue about it. So he took that as her family trying to manipulate her and change her mind from what her beliefs and values were. And he said to her, I just don't think that they're good for you. I don't think you should talk to them anymore. So then her relationship with her family became really strained. Not long after this, there is a shift in everybody's observations where they just start aligning and seeing kind of what everybody was feeling, behind the scenes, that things are a little bit more isolated than usual, something's going on. And it was at Rania's birthday party. So the existing friends and family that were still in their life at this point saw tension between David and Kamel, and they all remembered it and felt it at that day. I guess they didn't speak to each other the whole day. They weren't rude to each other or anything like that, but they were just very disconnected, which they weren't used to seeing because they were very much a close team. They didn't see this side of them, so it stood out. And then a couple weeks after this party, David starts recording these episodes that Kamel starts sharing with him. Kamel's experiencing some form of awakening, I guess she feels like, in her mind. She's starting to hear voices. I think the first one seemed innocent enough, but it scared her. It wasn't anything threatening. I think the voice said something about, do you like the music, or turn up the music, or something about music, and she heard it very distinctly, so she could hear a voice and no one else heard it. It scared her, but it wasn't like a threatening, menacing, command or anything like that. But David records her talk about it and has this documentation of it on his phone. The month after Rania's birthday, we're in September, David finally hears back from the Mikes. He's done his rewrites, but they're feeling they're having some difficulties moving forward. Their thoughts on the whole thing in general was almost like it was playing out as a roadmap to an American Revolution. We should revolt and this is how we should do it. So they weren't really comfortable getting on board in that per se. So they wanted some adjustments there. And then they were also feeling like this was something that might do better and suit an audience geared towards a television series, not necessarily a Hollywood production. So this is not what he's banking on at all. He's feeling defeated. He went in there wanting this Hollywood movie done. And it's been his focus and his dream for the past 4 years. So in his journal, he's writing that he's having trouble sleeping. He's feeling defeated. And at one point when he was, so focused on being famous and having this big project that he'd poured everything into being a success, he stopped saying that. Friends, would ask him what was going on with the movie, and he would say oh, it was just a pipe dream, it's nothing, we're not going to move to Hollywood anymore, and he wouldn't really want to talk about it. However, there does seem to be a shift where he does accept this new fate of sorts. What he wants to do is kind of turn everything into a documentary of how that all had unfolded. He starts pulling together interviews that he had done, behind the scenes stuff, talking at these conventions, and he wants to compile that all into, this is what I was creating. It didn't pan out, and this is why I think it didn't pan out, because I think people believe that I know where we're headed, and if we don't wake up, this is where we're gonna go. So he's now focused on waking people up, not necessarily entertaining them anymore. He also hoped with this shift, there would be new opportunities for him. He could turn this into a brand, kind of probably something like Call of Duty, where he could turn Gray State into video games, where he had merch and memorabilia and all that stuff. And he thought a good idea to attract more people would be to release this documentary for free. So it wouldn't go to theaters, no one would have to pay for it. It would just be a free video you could watch, and he thought that would kind of attract more of an audience. But someone who also has business partners who've also invested a lot of time into this project and money with David. This could be problematic, which we will visit in part 2. So just remember that. But this is kind of all happening behind the scenes. These are his dreams and his new goals and his new focus. But on the surface, his fans that he has, really gotten excited about this movie. They've got this trailer out. They've spinning all of their theories and ideas. Like, we've got to wake people up. We got to get this out there. They're seeing that there's no project happening after all of these years. And they're already in that conspiracy theory wheelhouse. So they don't trust anybody. So they are now not trusting David. They're kind of turning on him and being like, this movie's never going to get made. What a crock of shit. We've followed you. We've supported you. Getting blasted with hate from these people who supported him at one point. So now we're in about mid-October and Kamel's family hasn't heard from her. There's still a big rift there. Anytime they've tried to reach out to her, it's been David that's called back and said, we've made it really clear we don't want anything to do with you. So her sister takes it upon herself to just take a risk and drive 17 hours from where she lives to show up at Kamel and David's house in hopes to talk to her. I guess their father had lent David his car so that he had something to drive. So her sister was going under the ruse that their dad needed the car back, but she would exchange her vehicle and take the dad's back so that he could have it back, but they wouldn't be left without it. So her and her fiance, they make this 17-hour drive. They get to the house and it's David who answers and he's like, I said we don't want to see you guys. Why are you here? So she says, well, I was hoping to see my sister, but if I can't, I need to exchange the vehicle and we'll leave hours. But David's like, all right, I need about an hour to get it cleaned up, get my stuff out of it. And the only way you can take it back is if you take both of them. If I can't have the dads, I don't want any of them. But her sister wasn't comfortable with that because she didn't want to leave the family without. That wasn't the intention of coming. She wanted to just see her sister. But then she'd also have to drive back 17 hours by herself because her fiance would have to drive one vehicle and she'd have to drive the other. So she's like, no, it's okay. I'll leave mine. It's no problem. And he kind of had a fit and he was like, fine. If you don't take both of them, you don't get any. The deal is off. Everybody who has described him that I've seen basically all has the same thoughts. It's that he is very much type A personality. He needs to have control of every situation, not always necessarily in a negative way, but as I mentioned earlier, just the way that he takes control over the filming aspect. He couldn't have anybody else pick the cast or tell them how to do the scene or what costumes they were going to wear or the music or the special effects. He has to have control of the situation completely. And I thought Kamel's sister telling this story was just eye-opening to me to see in those situations how much he really did need to control. It was if I can't dictate how and when and what vehicle, I don't want any of them. And now I'm controlling a new narrative. This is mine now. I don't want any car because you're telling me which one to keep. So he ends up slamming the door and being like, I'm not going to do any of it now. You guys can go home. Kamel's sister's fiance tries to reason with him. He goes to the door and he's like, you know what? All right, I'll take a breather here. Her family really needs her. If there's ever going to be a way to repair this, we can't just keep making issues. So if you need an hour to clean it out, we'll come back and we'll take both of them. So they give him an hour, they come back, and when they come back, it's David just watching them out the window. They still haven't seen Kamel. They know it's not going to happen. And on the hood of her sister's car, there's a photo of Kamel with her mom and sister. And on the back of it, there's basically a note that says that she'll always love her sister. And so her sister sees the note, she grabs the pen, and she writes on the back of it, I love you too. And she leaves the car, even though she said she wasn't going to. And her fiance just take the dads and they peel out of there. And she said she didn't do it for David, so that he had wheels or anything like that. But she hoped that if Kamel ever wanted to leave, she had a way to do it. It would have been really interesting interesting to hear what Kamel's sister would have had to say about Kamel's condition at this point, because she never got to see her. So I don't know if she realized that behind the scenes she was also spiraling. It wasn't just the David control. Kamel was also going through something of her own. There was a situation where, again, David had recorded on his phone Kamel recounting this really unsettling experience again. Before, it was more innocent, but like a little bit creepy because you're hearing voices. But this time, Kamel said that she had been raptured and she started shaking and crying and howling. She is telling David, there's nothing left for us here. She says that they need to leave. They all need to go together. She wants David and Rania to come with her. And she believes that there's nothing left of their life here on Earth, essentially. But she's not 100% sure where the source is coming from. So she says she needs time to figure that out and make sure that what she's believing and hearing and feeling is legit, which has got to be so scary because David's also obviously going through things. His journal entries are starting to get darker again. And from outside professionals looking in after the fact, they said that it looks like something called delusion by proxy, and it's apparently very rare, but basically what it is, it's like a manic episode that is being shared by two people. There's usually one that is a little bit more dominant, and generally the treatment for it is to separate the two people from each other, and it tends to sort itself out. So the fact that they're pretty much completely isolated at this point and they're only together 24/7, it appears to be like it could be a recipe for disaster. This is around Thanksgiving as well, and Kamel ends up meeting with a friend that used to be a coworker, and she's talking to her about kind of her wanting to take a shift into similar career path that has to do with like health and wellness and nutrition, but incorporating different religions as well and exploring fasting. So she's talking at this get together about learning that people can go days and days without food. A lot of people will go up to 40 days without food, and explaining what she was learning about that. And it wasn't anything that was overly focused on, but for me, something about that is very curious to me because I was recently watching one of the new series that's on Netflix right now called Unwell, and on there they've got like a whole segment on fasting, and there was something that I didn't know about fasting, which was that if you do these long fasts that are unsupervised and done incorrectly, you can go into a manic state and you can experience like these hallucinations, these breakdowns. You could become suicidal. It's really scary and dangerous, and I had no idea about it. I don't know if this is what was happening to Kamel, but it definitely stuck out to me. I couldn't find anybody who knew if she was fasting at the time or if David was fasting at the time as well, but I just thought it was really curious that she had brought that up to the friend. It seems like it was something she was looking into, so who knows if she had started it and was doing these long fasts and that's what was going on. But it definitely was something that stood out to me and I wanted to share it with you. All right, so now we are about a week before Christmas and David and Kamel go and visit a friend of his. It seemed like it was a quick visit, but he said that Kamel and David were really happy, like exceptionally over the top happy and excited, in really good spirits. And he said that David was dropping off some things that he had borrowed from him, as well as things that he thought maybe he could find use in. I think it was some books on like how to be successful in Hollywood. So, you know, seems like he's still on his, I'm not going to pursue that dream anymore. We're going to focus on the documentary thing. So he was kind of passing the torch to his friend. I guess they didn't stay too long. It was a very nice, sweet, happy visit. And then as soon as they were there, they were gone. And then on December 19th, 2014, David and Kamel pick Rania up from school, and that's the last time they're ever seen alive. We do know, though, that David had made a list of things that he wanted to do and accomplish for the New Year's on Christmas morning. He made a 6-day countdown for the new year. He said it was going to be a new year, new focuses, and then he wrote a note to himself with a reminder that he had until December 30th to get the rest of his donations in for his crowdfunding for the project that he wanted to create for this documentary to launch. So, I mean, he had plans, he had goals ready to go, ready to rock with a new focus, new plan for the documentary, really wanted to get the word out, wanted to wake people up. And then the theory is that after he wrote this note, he went to his bedroom, went into his gun safe, he shot Kamel and Rania, and then he went to lay beside them and take his own life too. Now, his brother says that on December 26th or 27th, he could not remember the exact date. He went to the Crowley house to drop off Christmas presents. He said that he didn't attempt to talk to them or see them. He didn't ring the doorbell or knock on the door. He just left the presents on the front step. The main living room window is right beside the front door, and you have to walk in front of it to get to those front steps, and it was wide open, and that unfortunately is where the three of them were. But his brother didn't look in that day. He just dropped off the presents and left and went home. So he says that he didn't see them. And then it wasn't until July 17th that the neighbor who was returning from dropping off a family member saw the presents that were just scattered all across the front step. So he went over figuring that they were away and somebody had just dropped them off. And he went to take them to keep them dry, and then he would return them later. And then when he got to the front door, the family dog is going nuts inside. He's clawing at the front window, going berserk. So he thought, well, that's weird because the dog's here. So maybe they are here. So he rings the doorbell. Nobody comes. His wife comes over to try to scope out and see if she can see anything. And sure enough, they look in the front window and they see them. Now, this seems all pretty cut and dry. It definitely did to me. But what if I told you things might not be as they seem? What if I told you that at the scene, there's a lot of unanswered questions, specifically like a giant Islamic message written on the living room wall in blood, or the fact that all three members of the family were missing pieces of their body. David and Kamel were missing the majority of their heads. We will go through all of this and more, like why it appears bodies were moved, or why there's never been a bullet that has been proven to be the bullet that killed David, or why there's a knife in the living room with all three members of the family's blood on it and no wounds. There are so many questions that I want to go through, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts. So we will do that together in the next video. That is it for me today. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. I think I'll see you guys this Saturday. I think I got a video for you. So that's exciting. It won't be a reality recap, like, whoa. Least successful video up to date. I'm pretty sure highest amount of dislikes I've ever gotten on a video. So hear the message loud and clear. We won't do that again. Honestly though, like I really want to do one for The Bachelorette, so I'm gonna try again. I'm like those YouTubers who are like, I know you don't want to vlog, but I'm turning into a vlog channel. That's me. But I want you guys to watch reality TV with me. Anyways, it's fine. Moving on. I will see you Saturday. It won't be a reality recap, although I will make you guys love those one day. I will miss you until then. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so, so much. Make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.